Hi, very good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening for various other countries. We are joining in from more than 30 countries today. Uh, we welcome you on 87th International Weekly Meeting on COVID in association with CMAAO. This is a special edition, and we all know why we are here. This is open for all doctors. As discussed, we have more than 30 registrations. Today, we are on 4th of December. Why we are here? B1.1529 SARS-CoV-2 variant of concern was being reported to WHO by South Africa on 24th of November, which was later named as Omicron, the variant which was already been detected in more than 38 countries and has been suggested it is more contagious by WHO. So today we have a topic of Omicron COVID-19 virus update from South Africa. And to talk on this, we have Dr. Angelica Kotze, National Chairperson, South Africa Medical Association. She was the first physician to spot this virus in South Africa. We have Professor Salim Abdul Karim, South Africa Public Health Medicine Infection Disease Specialist. He's a chairperson presidential of advisory committee. He's widely been recognized for his research contribution in HIV prevention and treatment. He's a director of Center for AIDS Program of Research in South Africa and a professor of global health in Columbia University, a scientist who is actively involved in COVID-19. He has a long list of awards and credentials. We have Dr. Akhtar Hussain, chairperson for Employed Doctor Advocacy Forum from South Africa Medical Association. I would like to welcome Dr. Heidi. She is the president of World Medical Association. We have Dr. Chong from Singapore Medical Association, and we have 19 medical association countries over here. So we would like to start this forum with the opening remarks. Dr. Salim, can we start the presentation? Thank you so much for joining in, and I would like to thank, it's 6 a.m. for you, so thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure. Well, it's an honor for me to join you this morning. And as I was telling Dr. Akhtar Hussain that he owes me big time for making me wake up this early on a Saturday morning, but I do so with great pleasure. I'm going to give you a quick rundown about what is it we know and don't know about the Omicron variant. And I hope that at the end, you'll have a better understanding about what where we are in the process right now. So I'm going to touch on, why the concern about variants. I'm going to talk about this particular variant, its mutations, and end off with just a brief note about the approach to dealing with it. So when we look at the global pandemic, what we see is that the whole world has been through the first wave, second wave, and third wave. And right now, the whole world is going through the fourth wave. Now, it varies country by country, obviously, but I think you get a sense that the ongoing waves of infection, that we are now in a situation of increasing incidence. And so why the concern about new variants? Well, because variants have changed the COVID-19 endgame. You may recall that in November 9th, on the November 9th last year, when we heard the results of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine trial, we were all very excited. I mean, to me, to get a vaccine result of greater than 90% efficacy was quite amazing. And we all thought, well, here's the solution. We just simply vaccinate everybody, and that's the end of the story. Well, about a month later, when we first heard about these, we learned that actually it's not that simple. And so we've now come to understand that the way in which we are going to deal with this virus and the possible endgames are going to be heavily influenced by variants, because the variants have been emerging. Now, we had the original ancestral strain only for a very short period, because by the time the virus got to Europe, it developed the 614 mutation. And so the D614G mutant form of the ancestral strain is the dominant one. In fact, in most of Africa, we have the 614G originally in the first wave. But shortly, well, it lasted for quite a while, but on the 14th of December, we heard from our colleagues in the UK about the Alpha variant, and we announced the Beta variant from South Africa, and our colleagues from Brazil announced the Gamma variant early in January this year. And in March of this year, I remember the announcement that came from our colleagues in India that we discovered the double mutant. Well, it turned out it was the Delta variant. Now, the whole world is sitting up because we've got a new variant, the first case of which was announced from Botswana. So why are we concerned about variants? Should we just, live our lives and carry on? Well, this is the first wave in India, Brazil, and South Africa. And you can see that, in Brazil and South Africa, the first wave was pretty severe compared to India. Well, if you look at that situation and in the context of those first waves, you can see what the Delta variant did in India, dramatic impact. And, we all remember those vivid images on our television screens about the impact of Delta in India. Then, of course, the Gamma variant led to a pretty serious wave in Brazil. And in South Africa, the Beta variant led to our second wave, and the Delta variant led to our third wave. So what we have is a concern that variants are going to lead to significant new waves. And those waves, and this is now the proportion of all the sequences that are in each of the variants. So you can see how in South Africa, our first wave was driven by D614G, but how quickly Beta comes to take over. And just as quickly, Delta replaces Beta. In fact, we have, in the current situation, we have so few cases of Beta, Delta has literally wiped it out. So why is that the case? How is it that Delta comes to dominate in this kind of way? Well, it's principally its increased transmissibility. The increased transmissibility enables the virus to displace other variants. And so what gives it that increased transmissibility? Well, as far as the Delta variant is concerned, the first big issue is that the viral load in the back of the throat and the nose is about 1,000 times higher with the Delta variant. And this is actually a very nice study undertaken in China that compared viral loads with ancestral D614G and the Delta variant, and they showed how much more efficient Delta is in transmission, principally through this higher viral load. So when you speak or sing or whatever, the amount of virus that you have in the little droplets is a lot higher, and so you have much closer to infectious dose. The second is that in that same study in China, they showed that it's not just that there's more virus, it's that you are positive for a longer period. So you are infectious for longer. In fact, with Delta, you're also infectious earlier than you were with the D614G variant. So it's these characteristics of the virus that enable it to develop increased transmissibility. In addition to its ability to reach higher concentrations and to remain infectious for longer, what we have also seen with the Delta variant is that we have seen some measure of immune escape. And that immune escape has featured through that we saw higher numbers of infections as breakthrough in vaccinated people than we would normally expect. Now, no vaccine is 100% effective, but we were seeing breakthrough infections at twice and sometimes even up to 4 times the expected rate. So there is some measure of immune escape. And then finally, what we saw with the Delta variant is that past infection offered almost no protection against the Delta variant, because all of those individuals who had past infection were still getting infected at pretty much the same rate as those without past infection. So as a result, we've always been worried about a new variant that has higher transmissibility. And in South Africa, we are now in our 4th wave, and numbers are rising very rapidly. And so we are deeply concerned that we have a new variant that's displacing the old ones. And true to form, yes, it is. So as you saw how beta replaced D614G or Delta replaced beta, now what we are seeing is that Omicron has become the dominant form of the virus. And in fact, the minister announced on Thursday that about 74% of our current sequences are Omicron in South Africa. So giving you some idea of how quickly it is becoming dominant. So for many people, I know, in fact, many of my colleagues have been saying, oh, you can't get worse than Delta. Well, you can get rid of that notion because Omicron is here and it is turning out to be quite fast. It's not clear as to whether it's really faster than Delta, but from the early evidence, that certainly is what it looks like. And of course, it has now spread across the world. And this diagram is from the 1st of December. If I have to do it today, I can assure you there will be a lot more orange here, including from India, Malaysia, and several other places that have recently reported cases. And of course, it shouldn't be surprising to us, because by the time we identify a new variant, it has already been transmitting for about 6 to 8 weeks. Because even though we have pretty good surveillance, you can't really identify it when it's very early, because it's often asymptomatic, and the cases and the surveillance that we do might not pick it up. So this is the current situation in terms of the global distribution of Omicron. So what about this variant? What is it, and what do we know about it? Well, when I was asked, just over 10 days ago, about 12 days ago, the person who did the sequencing of that first batch after it came from the private labs is Professor Tulio de Oliveira, and his laboratory is on the floor below mine. And when he saw this sequence, first thing he did was run up and call me down to come and have a look. And when I saw it, I said, oh my goodness, whoa, what do we have here? And the thing that strikes you about Omicron is that it has the most important mutations from alpha, beta, gamma, and delta in it. So it's like almost, if you want to call it, like a super variant, because it has combined all of their advantageous mutations. So it has, for example, at position 681, and in that region near the furin cleavage site, it has several mutations that confer on it the same kinds of benefits that Delta had in the form of increased transmissibility. And for example, it has the mutations at positions 417 and 484 that the beta variant and gamma variant have that confer the ability to escape antibodies. And so this mutation profile is quite unusual. There are in Omicron, there are over 50 mutations. There are just over 30 just in the spike protein. So it just gives you some idea about why the initial concern about this variant. So what can we tell about the mutations? Now, it needs to be pointed out that we've only known this virus for about 2 weeks, or just less than 2 weeks. And so we don't really know that much about it. We don't have clinical studies. We don't have laboratory studies yet. We're busy with all of those things. But what is it that we can say about Omicron? Well, we can look at its mutations, and you can look at it because there are 3 different groups of mutations. The first are mutations that we know quite well. These are mutations that are already in the other variants. And what do we know that they do? So, for example, the mutation that the deletion at position 69 and 70, those confer S gene target failure. So this particular variant on the Thermo Fisher kit, which looks for 3 genes, the S gene is negative. Now, it's still PCR positive because it's positive on the other 2 genes, but the S gene target failure becomes an important marker for us because it means we know that we're dealing with Omicron even before we do a sequence. We can tell just by the Thermo Fisher kit. But we also know that these mutations confer increased transmissibility, they improve binding affinity so that it makes it easier for the virus to attach to cells. So let me give you one example so that you grasp how that happens. So at position 484, the virus itself is negatively charged. The position that 484 sits on in the ACE2 receptor, at that point, the human cell or the ACE2 receptor is also negatively charged. So when you look at the D614G variant, and you look at the way in which the virus attaches to the ACE2 receptor, you see the kind of repulsion that occurs. So there's a bit of flapping that goes on there. And it's because these 2 negatively charged molecules are creating that they repel each other. But when you get the mutation at position 484, the virus becomes positively charged at that point. And so a positively charged virus sitting on a negatively charged ACE2 receptor improves binding such that it becomes difficult for antibodies to attach. And of course, there are a whole range of conformational changes that enable the virus to at least partially escape antibodies. Now, there are several mutations in Omicron that we know a little about, but we don't really know a lot about them because they're not in the other variants of concern. And the vast majority of the mutations in Omicron, we have no idea what they do. And that's what is quite concerning. We don't really know how this virus is going to behave because we don't really know what all these different mutations do. And so that's been one of our challenges. And if we look at what's going on in South Africa right now, I thought just to give you some idea of why we are concerned is that if you look at the Gauteng province, that's where Angelique is based, it's around Johannesburg, you can see each of our first 3 waves that, they rose, and you can see with the Delta variant, we had a much more severe 3rd wave in Gauteng than we had others. And you get some idea of how the doubling time with Omicron is higher and the rate at which it is increasing is higher. I mean, to give you some idea, we were in Gauteng province, we were 10 days ago, less than 200 cases per day. And as of yesterday in Gauteng province, there were 11,500 cases in a matter of 10 days, giving you some idea of how fast the cases are increasing in Gauteng province. So if this is a harbinger of what's to come, we should expect increased transmissibility. And if it has that increased transmissibility, we expect it to displace the other variants. So let's quickly go through what is it we know that's of clinical relevance, and I'll deal with the 5 key questions that everybody has. So you'll have to just excuse the smiley face. This was for a public presentation on national television. So the first question we are being asked, so does it affect the diagnostic tests? Well, the answer is no. The tests are performing just as well. We use principally here the Roche platform and the Abbott platform, but we also use the Thermo Fisher platform. And what we have been seeing is the Omicron is being readily picked up by all our diagnostic tests, including rapid tests. So we have no concerns about it being picked up by our diagnostics. And to give you some idea, this is giving you the number of tests on the Thermo Fisher kit that have the S gene dropout. And you can see how during the current wave that we are dealing with Omicron, we've had a drastic increase in the number of S gene dropouts. So it's actually a very good marker, and it's something that all laboratories should think about, doing at least some of their tests with the Thermo Fisher kit, so they are watching out for S gene dropouts. But what about the clinical presentation? Well, Doctors Kutsia and Hussein are much better placed than I to comment on this. But one has to be very careful in interpreting early data. So if you look at the current evidence and the anecdotal information that we are hearing, is that the initial cases that are being seen are largely in younger people, and that the individuals themselves have a clinical profile that is similar to what we've always been seeing in COVID-19. One has to take that with a bit of circumspection, because we all know that the severe cases of COVID-19 occur largely in the immune phase of the disease, not the viral phase. And so we would expect that we will see more severe cases in about 2 to 3 weeks from now. Is there a tsunami of serious COVID coming? I don't know, but certainly the evidence that we have right now, even though it's anecdotal, suggests that there are no red flags at this time. But I wouldn't make too much more of that. And so I've put a pensive face, not a smiley one, pensive, waiting for the more data. What about our current treatments? Well, our current treatments seem to all work, including dexamethasone, tocilizumab. This is just anecdotal at this time, but certainly we've got no reason to be concerned about that. As far as the Regeneron antibodies, the monoclonals, are concerned, it's not clear as to whether they will remain effective. It doesn't impact too much on South Africa because we don't really use monoclonals to any significant extent. And as for the new oral treatments, we would expect that they would still remain effective, given that changes in viral structure don't really impact drugs like molnupiravir and Paxlovid. What about our public health measures? Well, we expect them all to work just as well. Masks and ventilation and avoiding crowded spaces should be all good. And when it comes to immune responses, that's where we have our concern. So if you think about the 5 key questions, the only one that has, a sad face is this one, because the preliminary evidence suggests that, we should be seeing more immune escape. And this is based on the mutations. Now, we know this because we dealt with beta variant. Beta variant had no respect for past infection. The infection rates with beta variant were the same whether you had past infection or not. And I would expect Omicron to be quite similar. There are some very early clinical data from our database that suggests that that's the case. What we have is that when somebody tests PCR positive, there's an algorithm in the database that looks for a past positive test. It was set in order to avoid duplicates, to reduce the duplicate count in people who go for more than one test. But what it does in the process, it identifies whether you were infected in the past waves. And we have seen a drastic increase in the number of people who are now testing positive, who are also positive in past waves. So we can expect we are going to see reinfection. So for all those people who were, arguing that the natural infection will protect them and that they don't want to take vaccines, well, they're going to pay that price because Omicron is going to infect them. As far as the vaccines are concerned, we really don't know. We don't know, how the vaccines are going to pan out. We have no clinical data on that. We have no laboratory data. Professor Alex Segal from Ari, whose lab is now on the floor above mine, is very busy growing the virus, and he will test them against sera from vaccinees with J&J and Pfizer. And so we'll get some idea about whether antibodies from these two vaccines neutralize the virus. And we are waiting with bated breath. In fact, yesterday I said to Alex, where's the results? He says, no, the virus is still growing. It takes 2 weeks to grow the virus. But what is it that we do know about the net effect? Well, we know that these mutations are likely to increase the risk of immune escape, and that we are likely to be dealing with some kind of alteration in the clinical efficacy of our COVID-19 vaccines. But we've dealt with this in the past. This is not really an issue for us. When we look at the AstraZeneca vaccine, we know that the AstraZeneca vaccine is 70% efficacious against the D614G variant, but it's got almost no efficacy against beta variant. We showed in South Africa that it's only 10% efficacious against beta, at least for mild disease. And we know that AstraZeneca is pretty good against Delta variant. And similarly with Pfizer-BioNTech, we know that it works pretty well against beta, but we saw declines in its efficacy against Delta. So this is not a situation that we are walking into with no past knowledge. We know that our vaccines have differential protection depending on conformational changes, binding affinity, and so on. So we'll deal with Omicron in the same way. But the one thing we know is that the vaccines remain effective even over time against all the variants for severe COVID-19 and hospitalization. And I can quote you many different studies, and we think that most of that is so because severity is largely influenced by T-cell immunity. So studies in Qatar, in California, in the Kaiser Permanente group, or New York State, all of them provide pretty compelling evidence that regardless of the variant, that protection by our vaccines, and they work for pretty much all of the vaccines, that protection for severe disease is pretty good. The New York State study, which is has just been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. 8.8 million people were involved in that study. You can see that the 3 vaccines that they use have very high, I mean, it's in the 90% range. So it's pretty high efficacy against severe disease. And the diagram on the right-hand side is the data from the whole of Israel. So that's even a big study. And again, that in young people and old people, the efficacy of vaccines against severe disease seem to be doing pretty well. So if that is true for Omicron, and I have no reason to expect otherwise, we should not be seeing many cases of severe disease from Omicron. And that's borne out partially. Again, the minister announced on Thursday that 87% of patients with COVID in Gauteng hospitals are unvaccinated. And this is against a backdrop that we have about 43% of adults in South Africa with at least 1 dose. It's about 35% that are fully vaccinated in the adult population. So it certainly looks like the vaccines are holding up, at least to some extent, based on this very early data. So what approach should we consider? Well, the first is, I mean, too many people are overreacting. It's like we don't know how to deal with variants. We were expecting this. We anticipated this variant. And I mean, to provide compelling evidence that we've been expecting this, in a presentation I gave at the Moseneke Commission in September, I just mapped out, based on high school mathematics, no modeling, that we should expect a 4th wave. And my estimation was that it would start somewhere around the 2nd of December. And I explained to Justice Moseneke that we are expecting several new variants. So, why people are saying, oh, what happened here? We were expecting this. This was what we knew was coming. So there's no need for panic and overreaction. And I have to say, very fortunately, many of the countries I've been dealing with now, including India, Malaysia, so on, I've seen a much more considered, much more careful approach. And, we've dealt with variants before. We're going to be dealing with variants in the future. And we've also dealt with variants with immune escape. So closing borders doesn't help, and I won't explain why. I'll take it most of you are familiar with the arguments. But I want to end off with that. The 3 things that I think we're going to have to factor in our response is, firstly, we have to be ready for the higher transmissibility. We have to go on the basis that this is going to be much faster than Delta, which means that even if Omicron is not clinically worse, and we know that viruses evolve over time to become less severe, right? And eventually to become some kind of mild endemic condition. So that's the long-term evolution. But right now, in this particular variant, even if it's not clinically worse, we're going to see a huge pressure on the hospitals just by virtue of the fact that the cases occur so fast. And even if the proportion that need hospitalization is small, the numbers will be massive and the pressure is going to come. And so quite a lot of detailed planning has gone into this. Extra storage tanks for oxygen, a whole lot of plans, securing additional PPE. All of that planning and preparation is going to be quite important. And then, in South Africa, our problem was that we go through these periods of low transmission for about 3 months. And when we do that, everybody gets complacent. In fact, when I go on my morning walk, more than half the people have their mask on their necks. And so I have to keep reminding them that, we're living still in the midst of a pandemic. So, the public health measures work, we've got to use them. And then finally, we are likely going to see lots of reinfections, and we're going to see breakthrough infections. My worry is that the anti-vax lobby is going to ride on this, that the vaccines are useless, you're still getting vaccinated, you're still getting infected, why bother with vaccination? And so we're going to have to stand firm because the benefits of vaccination remain in terms of severe COVID. And among the things that are now being considered for implementation in South Africa is where only vaccinated individuals will be allowed indoors. Okay. So I hope I've given you a sense of, what is it we do and what is it we don't know about the Omicron variant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. It was an excellent presentation and a lot of insightful. We will now open the forum. Before we can do that, Dr. Angelica, would you like to give any update to us? And Dr. Akhtar Hussain? Dr.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I want to thank Prof. Karim. If I don't know, that television program, Phone a Friend. Well, I phone a friend, and I thank him for being able to phone him 10 o'clock at night, and he's always there for me, and he always takes my calls. Thank you so much, Prof. I really appreciate this. For now, exactly what Prof said, we still do see, I haven't confirmed this morning with my colleagues yet, it's too early, still mild diseases. Yes, I have said this before, we do see the breakthrough infections. Yes, we do see normal immune escape from reinfected people before. But something that, as you go in, so remember, we started already from the 18th of November to see these cases. So this last few days, I do see patients a bit, coming in with a bit more severe symptoms, not meaning severe as in oxygen or those, but with myalgia, headache, and the fatigue, that is a bit more severe. If you can define it, I want to say my unvaccinated people are having a more severe headache, a more severe myalgia and fatigue than my vaccine escape patients. So again, it just confirmed that the vaccines are really somehow protecting you. It somehow make your infection less severe in the symptoms. And I cannot stress more than enough, you have to get vaccinated, non-pharmaceutical interventions. And we all sit and wait to look at the immune response, the inflammatory response. That's what we will see it going forward in the hospital admissions. We wait for that. For now, we keep on getting the message out there that please test, and we can see at least here, the anti-vaccination is not playing a role. We can see there's a high uptake of patients going to go and get themselves tested. And that's right, it should be like that, because if you can get your patients tested, if they understand mild symptoms, go and get yourself tested. And what do we mean by that? And then get them into the surgeries and get them to go home with conservative measurements and all of that. But I also want to say that I think we're going to run a bit in trouble. We need to understand how long after you had the Omicron variant, are you still really infective? Because we have seen that some of these people, they really get better within 5 days since presenting to the surgeries. Then they don't want to isolate anymore or quarantine. They want to go back to work. They feel fine. And that might also be going to be a concern going forward. I even had 2 patients vaccinated, reinfected, or breakthrough infection that, when I said you have to isolate, we need to check the family out. The way that and both of them are men having their own businesses. And because they didn't feel that bad, I can promise you they went back to work and to go into work because they don't understand. And you try to tell them. So that is my few comments this morning, because I know there's people burning to ask Prof. Salim Karim some questions. So thanks for that.
Hi, can I invite Dr. Akhtar?
Good morning. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you very much. Once again, I like to thank Professor Salim Abdul Karim. We are so grateful for your presence and your presentation. It's truly, it's a learning all about the new variants. Only thing I just want to add, because Prof has given us whole perspective, South Africa and around the world. So the third wave, the 3rd of December till yesterday, we had 16,055 cases, and that is 24.3% positivity. And day before that, on 2nd December, it was 11,000 new cases in 24 hours. Our death rate was not that high. Yesterday was only 25. And the admission in the public hospital, in fact, around the South Africa 664 hospital, there was a 3,000 admission. Out of that, 262 patients was admitted in ICU, and 106 patients were on the ventilator. The rest of this is, Prof is already mentioned. Only other point I like to add, even the WHO experts call for a rethinking about the travel ban against South Africa. It's like to punish people who are just detecting or reporting this variant is unfair. Thank you. Thank you, Saurabh. I will ask for other audience to have a question.
Thank you so much. And before we can open the round for question answers, can I invite Dr. Heidi Stensmer from World Medical Association, if she's still there. Dr. Heidi, can you just give some update for us?
So I don't know if you can you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
So it's so early here. I don't know if you can hear. I didn't think.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Oh, you can. I thought I was done.
We can.
Yeah. I ran out of battery, so I had to move my my computer.
Yeah.
So can you repeat the question? The update on which part?
Yeah. We just want you to speak something on this virus before we can start the question answers.
Yeah. So we see a wide and very rapid spread, but I think you have in the presentations here covered about everything we see. But we see a rapid spread, and in the view of the also low vaccination rate in many countries, many African countries down even below 6%. And the population, we are fearing, we are very concerned, had some meetings about the risk of the very high spread. What we see here in many countries, or with the reports we get, is that more children are affected, and that we see a rapid spread in schools. We do see mild symptoms, but there is still a great concern, of course. We also see a rising number of hospitalization, but not as, of course, like the previous waves, just as mentioned here. What else that is not mentioned? Well, there are less hospitalization in the ICU, so due to mild symptoms, of course. We see a high rate of fatigue. We'll see if that will stay, if that will be the overall expression, if it stays. But high fatigue and children and relatively mild symptoms. This is very fast, this one. So it's optimal. The virus is has optimized itself for a widespread, you might say.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. So we will now open the forum for question answers. Can you please raise your hands and ask? And I would like Dr. Chong to be here. Dr. Chong, can you please ask your first question? And
thank you, Saurabh. And Thank you, Dr. Karim, for that wonderful presentation. I have a question for Dr. Akhtar about the numbers that we just heard from him. You've mentioned 16,000 patients that were diagnosed yesterday, and the prior day was about 11,000 plus. I mean, what's the trend like in the last 1 week since the diagnosis of this disease, you know, from the 24th of November till now?
Thank you, Dr. Chong. It was started with a minimum number like 200, then 500,000. And within a week, it jumped to the 8,000, then 10,000. The day before yesterday was 11,553. And last night we got the figure 16,055 cases. So it's almost 22% to 24%. It's just increasing rapidly, you can see.
So there's no doubt that the transmissibility is very, very high. I mean, there's no doubt in our minds right now. I mean, this is one of the questions we've been, you know, one of the answers we wanted to know. Dr. Karim, have you got any comments on that?
You know, it's tempting to just say, yes, it's more transmissible than Delta. I would wait until we have, more sound data. I think what you're seeing is that the early indications are that it's more transmissible than Delta, but I wouldn't say it in any definitive way. At least we know it's as transmissible as Delta. What we're not clear about is how much more transmissible. And I provided in my Lancet article, which was published yesterday, an estimate that the doubling time is faster at this point, but it's still early days. It is faster for the Omicron than it was for Delta.
Dr. Karim, I understand that transmissibility is quite complex, right? It's not as simple as just the spread of cases. I mean, you have to see whether it infects vaccinated, whether it infects partially vaccinated, whether it infects non-vaccinated, at what speeds, and then how much of the population has these three different groups. That means vaccinated, partially, and non-vaccinated. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's the viral dynamics are influenced not only by the virus itself and its transmissibility. It's influenced by the movement of people, the level of restrictions. So one of the problems that I'm having is that when Delta came, our government acted very quickly to suppress movement and increase restrictions quite rapidly. In Omicron, the government decided to back away and didn't change anything. So people are moving around, and this is Christmas time. So, we're dealing with a very different reality here. So that's why I have to be very careful in not over-interpreting data that is influenced by many factors.
One of the interesting graphs I've been seeing in the last 1 week on Omicron is that graph where you have the R0 as the horizontal axis and the vertical axis is the drop in the titers. How do you, maybe you can shed some light on that graph, because that graph has been circulating all over the place on Twitter, Facebook, and so on.
Okay, I haven't seen that graph, but if you send it to me, I'd be very happy to send you a comment. I can just comment just generally. The R0, we actually call it RT here because it's a moving R0. And RT has been increasing, as you would expect. And we are now at an RT of around 1.1, 1.2, somewhere there. So it's not scary high. It's not an R0 of 3 or something. But it is concerning because we had anticipated that the vaccine would give us better protection than what we're seeing right now. And so that's the concern. But I'm happy to interpret the diagram when I get it.
Lovely. I'll send it to you shortly.
Thank you.
Can I have the
Professor?
next Ravi? Is it Ravi to speak? I saw Ravi putting up his hand.
Yes,
Sorry, Alvin.
yes. Thank you, Dr. Chong. Thank you, Prof. Salim. Wonderful presentation. In fact, I've seen you on TV on BBC, and now I'm seeing you personally here. Thank you once again. Okay, my question is the transmissibility among children below 12 years. Is it as high as the adults, or is it a worry, something that we should be concerned about? I would like some answers from you, Prof.
Yeah, so that's a big question. In fact, I got a query from The Economist I see in my emails this morning. Exactly that question. So I actually don't have data to answer that question. So all I'm going to tell you is speculation. I want that to be clear. I have no definitive data or any data to tell you. But the one thing we did see with the Delta variant is that very early on, it spread very rapidly in our schools. And it's the high mixing that we have in our school setting, the fact that the classrooms are poorly ventilated, and it just takes, one teacher to infect thousands of, hundreds of kids. So it really became a problem for us. And it was principally when we did the outbreak investigations, it was principally the teachers that brought the infections into schools. The teachers are the problem because the teachers stand in front of the class and they are talking all the time. And then they walk around the class and they are talking all the time. So they present the biggest risk to the children. The children themselves present some risk to each other, but not significant because firstly, children are not tall, so that they don't really pose much risk to adults, but they pose a risk to each other. So given what we saw with Delta, that teachers were infecting hundreds of kids very early in the Delta wave, I would be surprised if we don't see the same now. And early anecdotal information suggests that that's the case.
Thank you.
Saurabh, can I? Just
Dr. Jamal, just one second.
yeah.
Dr. Alvin?
I had raised my, thank you. This is Alvin from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Professor. The talk is so stimulating. I also like to first follow up the question on children, that in the States, they said that more children were infected by the Delta variant and then more with the MISC. But so far, of course, for the just Omicron, within 2 weeks, of course, I think we don't have enough data on it. But for just now, you had mentioned about the serious cases. They were more related to the cell immunity, about the T cells, etc. So first of all, the children has less mature immunity, the cell immunity system, perhaps. Is that right? That in the past, it seems that children were less infected, less severely infected, and less hospitalizations, etc. So do we have data for the Delta? Is the cytokine storms different in the children from the previous VOCs? That's why they had more children infected and more serious infections. This is the first question. And second question is about the cellular immunity. You said that the severe cases are more related to the cellular immunity. So, but then this, it seems that the breakthrough cases are more in the current Omicron variants. And even past infections were not preventive, and the vaccinations might not be that preventive. So how could we measure the cellular response in the people after vaccination or after past infection? how can we know the status of the cellular immunity in the individuals? Thank you.
So I'll just make one or two general comments. I can't answer your question in great detail, but just to say, children actually have really good immune responses, both in their B cell lineage and in their T cell lineage. In fact, that's the reason we give vaccinations to kids, is that they develop very potent immune responses that last their whole lifetimes. Vaccines and T cell responses diminish over time. And so that's why, elderly people, especially with immunosenescence, we see that T cell responses are slightly impacted as you get older. So that fact is the essence of why COVID-19, regardless of variant, is so much less severe in children than it is in adults. Now, what we found very early on is that our infection rate in children was quite high, but the actual symptomatic rate was very low. And that was in keeping with the data that came from China, from Professor Wu and Yu, from the original Wuhan outbreak. And what we found is that using antibody tests, we find that children have very high levels of exposure, but very few clinical cases. And that's in keeping with what everyone else has been seeing. Is that changing with Omicron? And the answer to that, I don't know. It's just too early to tell. I can tell you it did change with Delta. We began to see more cases of Delta, but I'm not sure because it was more severe. I think it just infected more kids. And because it infected more kids, we saw more cases of severe disease. By the way, higher transmissibility impacts children enormously, right? Because they are in congregate settings that are completely uncontrolled for longer periods than the rest of us. So, they present a huge challenge, especially when they go on their tea time break. Now you've got a mixing in addition to your enclosed space exposure. So you're not hiding to nothing with children, right? Because there's almost nothing you can do. You can just, insist on masks, but even with children, make them wear masks in school is not easy. So you can see what the problem is, that you get a higher transmissibility virus, many more infections in children, more children pitching up. Now, what are we seeing clinically wise? We're seeing basically MIS-C. We're not seeing anything drastically different from what was described in MIS-C. I don't think, maybe Angelique has better information, but my colleagues in pediatrics tell me that. I don't have much more. Sorry, I can't give you more insight than that.
Dr. Jamal, do you have a question?
So I'm sorry. Just I am just expecting some sort of interaction in the internet also, because I'm on the journey and maybe some noises may disturb you also. Sorry.
Yeah, Dr. Jamal, please ask
So
a question.
just try to clear it up.
Yeah, we can hear
thank you. Just a thing. Yeah, thank you. The thing is that actually I have seen in our CMAAO group that the hospital admission in case of children even have become more. Do you think that it is just proportional to the number of infections? Then it's okay. And the number two question is Dr. Akhtar. Actually, this is a very grave concern actually, because the Omicron has created a lot of anxiety, a lot of this. Yeah. So this is actually the reactions from the countries to just close the border. Why don't you think it's rational? Because we do not know actually. We know the transmissibility is high and this doubling time also is less, but we do not know actually whether the severity and the fatality rates also. But you just think of it. Can you just think of it rational that at the beginning, WHO was actually blamed not to advise the countries to close the border or to close the flight. So it is okay now. After some days, when the people see and the governments will see that transmissibility is high, but not the severity and the hospitalization and the fatality. So then again, this can be open. Why don't you think it rational? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
I'll just respond briefly to your first question. Yes, I think that the increased severity in children is a function principally of transmissibility. And the reason I say so is when we did our first seroprevalence survey, which was after the first wave, it was around 20%, 15 to 20% infection rate. So that means that our first variant, D614G, ran through our population and infected roughly 1 in 5. When we had beta, it took it up to around 40%. Now, that's quite high compared to the 20%, because the 20% of people were getting reinfected again as well. So when you think about the overall infection rate, there were many more people infected in our beta wave than in our D614G wave. Now, the most recent data we have seen from our seroprevalence estimates that we have about 70% of our entire population has been exposed to the virus. I mean, that's quite stunning. I mean, that's far worse than we get with influenza. So we're really dealing with a pretty infectious disease here. And with 70% exposure, that means that Delta, probably infected more than half our entire population. And I know that data coming from India suggested similarly, very high levels of exposure. Now, if you've got such high levels of exposure, you're going to see more cases of severe disease. It's not that the virus is more severe, you're just going to see more severe cases. And so I think transmissibility has been our main factor driving why, for example, here in Cape Town, Red Cross Children's Hospital was full during Delta, but not anywhere near as busy during Beta, our Beta wave. On the question, the last question you raised, what should we advise governments? I think WHO has been clear. For me, I can tell you what really hurts. I have learned, I've been working on HIV for 36 years, so I'm a bit jaded. And I've learned in HIV that the way you tackle a pandemic, that our biggest strength has to be in standing together. If we are going to respond by erecting fences, closing borders, and building barriers when we should be building bridges, that to me is an indication of how we have failed. Because this is not a country level epidemic, this is a pandemic. If this virus behaves anything like what we've seen with Delta, it is going to affect every country. And you can't get away from it. You can close borders. It's just gonna slow it down. It's not gonna avoid it, because this virus is going to get everywhere. I mean, maybe New Zealand can avoid it by just shutting everybody out, completely. But other than that, most of the rest of the world, we're gonna have to live with this Omicron variant.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Sajjad, you have something to ask, Prof? Can't hear you.
You muted yourself, Dr. Sajjad.
Yes.
Dr. Sajjad, you muted yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much, Saurabh. Thank you very much, Dr. John. I appreciate Dr. Karim for presenting a very informative presentation. I have few questions to all my dear Dr. Karim and Akhtar Hussain and Dr. Anjali. The number Dr. Akhtar Hussain said that the 11,553 cases being recorded last 24 hours in South Africa. Is it true? Isn't it?
Yes, that's true. That tested was 51,000, and out of 51,000 tests, 11,500 came up positive. That's true.
Okay. My question is that do you have any data about any vaccinated and non-vaccinated, about the comorbid, how many cases are in comorbid? So how many children are there? Do you have any data on it? Second is, as Anjali in her first report said that the symptom do not have any loss of smell or loss of taste. So do you find any loss of smell or loss of taste in these patients? And the last one is what is the actual treatment of this Omicron being in those who have been admitted in the hospital? What treatment is given? Some of the doctors asking for beta blocker for the raised pulse rate or heartbeat. So do you follow the beta blockers there, or what you do treatment of the particularly the Omicron patient? Number one. Number two, the last one is 11,553 are the Omicron cases, or it's a Delta one also? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Sajjad. I think those were meant for Dr. Hussain and Anjali.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sajjad. I will just try to give you some answer there. We didn't have enough information about the individual vaccination status, and therefore could not be on assessment on the extent of the Omicron. So recent reinfection have occurred, individual whose primary infection occurred across all the three waves. So it's too early to say those who are vaccinated or non-vaccinated, but those patients who are admitted in the hospital with the Omicron infection, especially pregnant women, none of them was vaccinated.
Anjali, you want to add something?
Yes, I just want to add again, no loss of smell, no loss of taste. That's still, haven't encountered anyone with those symptoms. It's still the myalgia, fatigue, headaches, and slight pharyngitis type of presentation. We haven't seen anyone needing oxygen. The tachycardia, very, very mild, 103 maybe, and not under the majority of patients. It's in a few patients, and they also, recover quite fast. So at clinical level, at primary healthcare, still the two things that we would prescribe at this stage would be a very low dose of cortisone, and also painkillers and bed rest, conservative. We really, the children I will go with Tamiflu. Whether it add value, I don't know, but it makes me feel better. Thanks.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Dr. Akhtar. Thank you, Prof.
Dr. John, just allow me one more. Yes. Just allow me to. Yes. I would ask the advantage of the booster dose.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
What is the advantage of having
booster doses? Yes.
Yeah.
Prof?
So this is a question which is there in the Facebook also. We need to know the booster dose. Does it help in this virus? And is there a mix and match which is required, or what do you suggest?
Can I ask my question also? It's related to vaccines.
Okay, yeah, Dr.
Both the questions. So I want to congratulate Dr. Karim, Dr. Angelique, Dr. Akhtar, and thank you, Saurabh, for getting all of them on board. We are all with you from South Africa and from India. And my question is that what is the current vaccine strategy adopted by South Africa? Has anything changed? So what are the current vaccines you're given? What I understand from your presentation, Professor Karim, is you are predominantly using Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. That's what I understood. But is that correct? And I know we are in a zone of anecdotes and informed speculation, but independent of that, what is your take on a killed vaccine like Covaxin, or what is the likely probability of a response to a Covishield? So there are three platforms predominantly we are seeing. One is the mRNA platform, second is the adenovector platform, and third is the killed platform. These are the predominantly vaccines available in the world. So what are your likely guessworks on that? Because a lot depends on the T cell immunity as much as the neutralizing antibodies. So I just wanted an overarching view. And then of course you can take up the booster question. Right now, if you have to boost, should it be a mix and match? And this question is to Professor Karim, but of course Angelique and Akhtar also can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shashank. Prof?
Yeah.
Dr. Joshi has put his finger on the wound, on the key issue. So what can we do with our vaccines to be better prepared? So the question was asked of me, should we consider giving booster doses? And in fact, it was Dr. Kutsia asked me to do that at a presentation I gave at her recent conference. I think based on what we have seen against Delta variant, and this is principally data from Israel, that when you get to about 6 months to 8 months after your second dose of Pfizer, the antibody levels have dropped about 1 to 2 logs. So in other words, there's between 10 and 100-fold decline in antibody levels. And the antibody levels impacted and correlated with whether you got clinical illness or not. So even though antibody levels are not a validated correlate of protection for vaccines, the antibody levels do correlate as to whether you get breakthrough clinical infection or not. And so Israel, based on their data, and it's in 2 papers, they're both in the New England Journal of Medicine. I get to cheat a bit because I get to see them earlier, given I'm on the editorial board. But so I use the original bar-on data and then subsequently the Goldberg data from Israel. And essentially those studies, I won't bore you with the details, you can read the papers, but essentially both those studies say the following, that in the elderly above age 65, that we get a faster decline in the antibody levels because they start at a lower point. And so they are at higher risk of getting clinical illness with Delta. And so there's a good case to be made for giving a booster dose to the elderly. Now, we always knew that immunocompromised people should be given 3rd doses, 4th doses, as many as they need to get immune responses because they don't respond well to 2 doses of Pfizer. But the elderly start off at a lower level, and so they benefit from a booster against Delta. I don't know whether they would benefit from a booster against Omicron. But given Omicron has so much similarity so much in common, let's just say that, with Delta, it is feasible, quite likely, that that's going to be the case, that people who've been vaccinated more than, say, 8 months ago may benefit from a booster dose. But all of this is speculation. I don't have any data to share with you. If you are going to boost, I think the data are now compelling. There is a terrific NIH study. Again, I presented it for Dr. Kutsia at her summer conference that showed that if you were given a J&J first dose, that if you boost the J&J with another J&J, you get an increase in antibodies that's between 4-fold and about 20, 30-fold. But if you boost a single dose J&J with a Pfizer or a Moderna, you get, in other words, an mRNA vaccine, you get 100-fold increase in antibodies. Drastic difference in antibody level. The data that comes from Sweden, it's a clinical efficacy analysis in Sweden where they use AstraZeneca and Pfizer, and they were mixing and matching because they didn't get supplies of AstraZeneca when they needed it. So they showed that there was better clinical efficacy that with giving AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer than you get by giving AstraZeneca followed by AstraZeneca. Giving AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer is not as good as giving Pfizer plus Pfizer. Pfizer plus Pfizer is still better than AstraZeneca plus Pfizer. Not much, but it is slightly better. But giving AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer is a lot better than giving AstraZeneca plus AstraZeneca. So for that reason, it makes a lot of sense to give, if you've taken a vector vaccine, is to take a single dose mRNA. And the FDA actually recommends that, CDC recommends that. In the US, you can walk in and choose. Unfortunately, in South Africa, you can't because South Africa has chosen to go a route of you got to be licensed. So there's no way Pfizer is going to license itself to be a booster dose for J&J. So, and J&J is not going to license Pfizer as a boost for itself. So we are stuck right now with the applications being Pfizer applying for a third dose booster in South Africa and J&J applying for a second dose of its vaccine. And by the way, Johnson & Johnson's most recent trial shows that giving 2 J&J is definitely better than 1 J&J. So taking a second J&J definitely has benefit. Sorry, I'm not sure if I answered
Any comment on the
we
K
get
vaccine?
Monica to answer to her question? Monica?
Dr.
Any comment on the K vaccine?
Monica?
Sorry, can we just get Monica to ask a question?
Please. Monica, please.
Dr.
Yes.
Monica?
Dr. Abdul Karim, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation, for reaffirming basic science principles, epidemiological approaches, and I think more than anything, a pragmatic approach to a situation that can escalate very quickly. And that is why you've garnered all the attention you have brought today. So I would like to expand on the conversation about vaccines and efficacy. So we know that vaccines can elicit a very strong, what I'm going to call a polyclonal antibody response to the receptor binding domain. The efficacy of these mRNA vaccines are extremely high. We've got data about the recommended dosing for 3 weeks, 4 weeks for Pfizer and Moderna, a little bit more data that if you extend the duration between the two from Canada and from England, we've got a little bit of information about mixing and matching, saying that Moderna is still 3 times stronger in eliciting antibody or humoral responses. So we've got a little bit of information coming from a lot of places, but we know that immunization with mRNA is strong. We know that boosting is very effective at the 6-month mark. and that these variants are emerging in a situation where we don't have adequate herd or community immunity. So in this current state of worldwide immunization and considering prior infection as potentially an immunization dose, rather it be a very weak dose, but consider it a dose. Your preliminary data from the lab that I think was above you, one floor, what has been the serology response to neutralizing the variant that you have right now? Because I think that the specific question that's going to come from the areas that have the access to immunizations is we anticipate that this is going to be like the beginning of the pandemic again, right? It is now November, December. We're getting this variant. We are now going to anticipate by March, we are going to have the same level of spread that we had with the original ancestral variant. And so if we get boosted today and say we got 2 mRNA vaccines doses, would we be protected?
Dr. Vasudev has asked questions that are so pertinent that she ensured I have no answer for them. So we don't yet have the data from Professor Segal. I can assure you as soon as we do, the whole world will know about it because everybody has the same question on their lips. I want to just perhaps point out one significant advantage that India and South Africa have from a rampant Delta variant wave. And that advantage, if you'll bear with me, I'll just show you a diagram. So this is from Shane Crotty. A colleague of mine is based in San Diego. And it's a brilliant piece of work from him. And basically what he shows, this is an editorial for another paper that was published in Science at the time, that natural immunity gives you this much of immunity. And I won't bother with the different components of the immune system, but when you get vaccinated, especially when you get vaccinated with mRNA, you get a better immune response, right? The immune response you get with vaccines compares well with severe natural infection. But when you have had natural infection followed by a single dose of mRNA, you get hybrid immunity, or what he called hybrid immunity. Just not to confuse it, this is not petrol engine and battery power. This is natural immunity followed by vaccine immunity. You have these amazing responses, right? The antibodies shoot up almost 100 times as a result. And we get both a strong B cell and a T cell response. And what's important about it is that this hybrid immunity, it's a lovely article in the NEJM that shows that this hybrid immunity neutralizes sabecoviruses. Now, sabecoviruses is the whole family of beta coronaviruses that the SARS-CoV-2 falls under. So in other words, if it can neutralize sabecoviruses, it will be able to neutralize the variants that we don't yet have, because they'll all be in this family. So the most potent way to protect the population, God forbid that we should actually consider doing this, but given that it's naturally available in countries like India and South Africa, where we have very high exposure, is we will be giving them hybrid immunity, which actually will hold them in really good stead. So in my view, hybrid immunity is number one. Then you're followed by your 2 doses of RNA, followed by a 3rd dose. But the one issue I should point out is that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is actually a lot better in stimulating T-cell responses than the mRNA vaccines. The mRNA vaccines don't do as well as vector vaccines. And in fact, with the vector vaccines, both AstraZeneca and J&J, your initial T-cell response and your initial B-cell response, you have a maturation process. So your antibodies against, when you've had a J&J vaccine, your antibodies at month 4 are better than your antibodies at month 1, because the antibodies continue maturing. So it's interesting that occurs with the vector vaccines. But to put it, to summarize, or in response to Dr. Vasudev's question, that we don't yet know what the neutralizing capacity is of the antibodies generated by these vaccines. Watch this space. We'll let you know as soon as we do. And that what we do know is that people with hybrid immunity, people with a booster are likely to be in a better position to respond because they have higher antibodies, and higher antibodies correlate with clinical symptoms. So that's the little piece of the puzzle we can extrapolate and speculate on. I'll stop there, but I hope I've answered your question, Dr. Vasudev. And actually, there was Dr. Joshi. I didn't know if I've answered your question adequately. Was there an addendum you had to your question?
A small addendum that what is your speculation on the killed vaccine? The likelihood of response of Omicron.
Okay. Now that's not an easy question to answer. I've been working with the Seychelles epidemic team, where they have largely vaccinated with Sinovac. And I can just tell you, Sinovac provided very little protection against Delta variant for clinical illness, but it did pretty well in preventing hospitalization. So I think with whole-killed vaccines and vaccines like the Sinovac, we should expect that we will not see strong antibody responses. And if antibodies are the main correlate, or whether you get clinical illness, you can expect to get many breakthrough infections. And certainly in the Seychelles, we saw that. We saw that they had quite a severe epidemic in the midst of a situation where they had vaccinated 97% of the adult population. So, even 97% vaccination with Sinovac couldn't hold Beta or Delta, actually, in their case, at bay.
Thank you, Prof. We have a question. Yes, Dr. Java, yes.
Because Professor Karim, thank you so much. You have enlightened us so much. Just one thing, we still 1 year already nearly we are pursuing after the vaccination started, but no idea about the minimum level of antibodies needed to protect for immunity, like that, number one. And number two question, you just mentioned that South Africa people, even the variants are just spreading. In the UK, they have taken the same procedure initially, but they have seen the catastrophe afterwards. In the second wave, of course, they have got more than 40,000 a day, the infections, but the number of cases, death is 100 plus something. Previously, it was 35 only. So how do you just rationalize this? This sort of idea that it should be open, even in such sort of Omicron is spreading. Thank you. These two questions.
I think, Dr. Chong, you will have to repeat the questions. I didn't get either of them. They were breaking up. Yeah.
Oh,
I think
number one,
I think what it's okay, Dr. Jamal. I'll just summarize it. I think one, he was asking about the UK situation. Why, despite the numbers that they are experiencing, they still decided to keep their borders open. Yeah, and then the other thing is, I believe he's asking about the level of neutralizing antibodies needed to protect.
Yeah. Okay, so the second question we don't have an answer for.
yes, minimum level. But why?
Yeah, I don't think we have an answer for that. I wonder if Dr. Vasudev has an answer, but I'm not aware of a protective threshold on the vaccines. It just seems that there's a general correlation between the levels. Whether there's a threshold, it's not clear to me at this time.
Yes.
And on the second question of the UK, I'd like to start by saying, who understands what's in the English mind? But for those of you who can interpret what goes on in the mind of a nation that has 50,000 cases per day, but still want to ensure that they can go to their pubs and their theaters and have zero restrictions, I have to say, defeats logic that I follow. It's a different mentality about how you should respond to a pandemic and how you should live in the midst of a pandemic. In my mind, they have fundamentally misinterpreted how the pandemic affects us. They are going on the basis that if people are not dying, it's okay. The reality is that a sizable number of people who have mild infections will develop long COVID. And let me tell you, you don't want to have long COVID. You've seen those patients, they can't even read a book. So you want to be in a situation where you are preventing all infections and minimizing all infections. This idea that you should just let people get infected, which I had to deal with right at the beginning of this pandemic when I had debates with Dr. Anders Tegnell, my counterpart from Sweden, and the Barrington Declaration and all that nonsense. I think it's just foolhardy in my view. And I'm not telling you something I haven't said publicly on BBC when I attacked the UK government for their decision on Freedom Day. So I wanted to just invite Dr. Vasudev if she wanted to comment on the vaccine immunity and the threshold.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Karim. In the US, we do not routinely check antibody levels. We don't check antibody levels to assess vaccination efficacy, nor do we provide anyone with a level of comfort to say that their vaccine worked and they can take their mask off and isolate. If anything, I use antibody levels, because I am an allergist, to evaluate those with first dose reactions, to risk stratify for these patients, to say that, yes, you do have specific antibodies to the spike protein as opposed to the general SARS-CoV-2 virus, so that the patients who got a single dose were reassured for that time until we said we had better data and processes to be able to evaluate those with first dose reactions. But in no case do we ever check by antibody levels as a marker of what level is good enough. I know that this is done in other parts of the world. I know it makes other people feel more comfortable to say that, yes, my vaccine worked, but we have no idea about what titer is required to provide you protection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask one last question for one person to ask the last question? That's Dr. Salma Kundi. And because I think we've taken a lot of Prof's time and Angelique's time and Dr. Akhtar's time. So Dr. Salma, you'd like to ask your question?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I missed the first part of the webinar. and I'm sure it was a brilliant webinar. I hope it's shared with me by Mr. Agarwal. My question is that there is a vaccine which is called CanSino, and since my daughter got that, she can't travel to many European countries. From what I recall, we had recommended this to the WMA, and they'd asked WHO, and WHO has sort of said that every vaccine is acceptable. But do you have any info about CanSino?
No.
Okay. Sorry about that, Dr. Salma. But I'd like to take the opportunity because we are running much over time already. And I'd like to thank Prof. Karim, Dr. Kudzi, Dr. Akhtar for their brilliant presentation today on the South African situation. We were all so keen and so anxious to find out what was going on there. And I think we got all our replies back in spades today. So very, very much appreciated this session by my South African colleagues, especially Prof. Karim, for all his presentation. And thank you very much for updating us on this situation. We were so pleased today to hear all this in a way, that we got the latest straight from the proverbial horse's mouth, if you know what I mean. So very thank you, a big thank you to all of you. And I think we'll call it to an end to the session. Otherwise, this will go on for another 1 hour. So I wish all of you a great festive season ahead. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And maybe, as I said to some other friends of mine, that the dual annus horribilis of 2020 and 2021 will come to an end, and we'll have an annus mirabilis of 2022 instead. I hope that is the case, and not yet a triple annus horribilis. Thank you very much, and all the best wishes to everyone. All the best festive season wishes. Thanks.
I want to end this session by thanking also.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Happy Christmas to all.
Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And special thanks to Dr. KK, who started this session 87 sessions before. So, he brought all the associations together to understand what's going on in the pandemic, and this is what it is. So the legacy continues for him. And I would like to also invite Dr. Salim in next few sessions, later on, whenever he has time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you.